Marburg virus disease is caused by a filovirus, the same family as the virus that causes Ebola. Marburg is up to 85 to 90% fatal without treatment, and its symptoms and transmission patterns are very similar to that of other hemorrhagic fevers from the same family virus. Notably, the source of this virus ultimately is the Egyptian fruit bats.
And this is two Samoan fruit bats. It's a fruit bat mother here, and the fruit bat baby. And of course, the fruit bat mother's hanging upside down because that's how fruit bats roost. And so you see the mother and the baby here. And so this is the actual right side up one, even though it looks like the mother is upside down. That's because she is. It says 2020 on the bottom.
Which are through parts of Africa and the Middle East. These bats carry the virus, and when humans have contact with them, they can pick this virus up.
In American Samoa, an island territory of the United States 2,500 miles southwest of Hawaii, the fight is one for economic survival, with a perfect storm of looming challenges threatening the viability of the territory's one essential industry. NewsHour Weekend Special Correspondent Mike Taibbi traveled to the front lines to bring us this report, which was supported by a grant from Pacific Islanders and Communication.
Inside the cannery, trays are loaded with several types of thawed, cooked, cooled, and ready-to-process tuna.
Skipjack, big eye, yellowfin, and albacore.
The trays are then rolled to the stands where most of StarKist's employees, explains Government Relations Manager Archie Soliai, do the hardest hands-on work.
70% of that workforce is cleaning the fish. We're skinning, taking off the bones.
Once cleaned, it's measured by hand into pouches, the packaging option gaining consumer popularity, or by automation into cans, the old standby.
We process close to 2 million cans per day. Cans, individual cans.
Plus tons and tons of fish meal, oil, and other byproducts used in agriculture, medicine, and nutritional supplements. It's an output that's kept StarKist at the top of the consumer tuna pyramid for most of the company's existence, and that from the early 60s made Charlie Tuna one of the advertising industry's enduring icons.
What you doing with it, Charlie? Sending it to StarKist so they'll notice what good taste I got.
Symptoms of Marburg, which include fever, diarrhea, vomiting, and severe hemorrhaging or blood loss, can begin anywhere from 3 to 21 days following exposure. Once the virus is infecting a human, it can then spread through direct contact with blood or other body fluids. It's not airborne like SARS-CoV-2 or measles. There are currently no approved vaccines or treatments for Marburg virus disease, though there are many currently in development. As you mentioned, there is currently an outbreak of Marburg virus in Rwanda, as you pointed out, with 27 confirmed cases and 9 deaths. I'm sure these numbers are going to change substantially in the days ahead. The apparent lower case fatality rate of 9 deaths for 27 patients should be interpreted cautiously, as these are very early case onsets, and I think a number of these patients still are very likely to die in the days ahead. This is the first outbreak of Marburg that's been reported in Rwanda, though there have been outbreaks in neighboring countries in recent years. Let me just say at the outset, if there was any country where this had to emerge, could Marburg get that big? It could, if in fact we see the kind of risk factors we saw in West Africa with Ebola, with the close human contact, the inability of healthcare systems to respond, and unfortunately the slow response of the international community. So do I think it'll get that big? I don't think so. I hope not. I, again, am encouraged by the opening salvo being in Rwanda and their ability to respond to help limit it. But I think it's clearly one where we could anticipate much larger outbreaks, and because people travel who could be infected without knowing it initially, we could see cases show up in countries around the world, just as we saw with Ebola in 2014 and 16. We ended up having cases right here in the United States. So while the efforts with Ebola were successful in stopping that outbreak, it should give us pause to believe we can do the very same with this. But I think at this point, again, the idea that we invest what we can as quickly as we can to limit transmission will be very important. And finally, it goes back to something that our center has really wrestled with for some time.
The 1918 flu pandemic was probably the deadliest one you've never heard of. It was an unusually deadly influenza pandemic caused by a mutation in the H1N1 subtype of the flu virus. That's right, it's the same virus we hear about every year. Because the outbreak coincided with World War I, the disease quickly spread around the world, infecting 500 million people and killing 50 to 100 million people, which at the time was 3 to 5% of the planet's population. It was in fact one of the deadliest natural disasters in human history that we know of, and no one was safe. Even and especially young, healthy adults were dying because of it. Most countries were affected by this influenza strain, even in the Pacific Islands, except in American Samoa. Here, the government quickly imposed strict quarantine regulations by surrounding the islands with warships. Thanks to Governor John Martin Poyer, who requested the ships upon hearing reports of the outbreaks on the radio, American Samoans were spared by this wave of deaths. Neighboring Samoa, which at the time was administered by New Zealand, didn't enforce a quarantine, and as a result, 22% of their population died of the flu. American Samoa was one of only 3 places in the entire world that managed to prevent any deaths during this pandemic.
Back in 2017 and 18, we were responsible for putting together a vaccine development roadmap for Marburg virus vaccines. And that sat on our website largely unused for the past several years. Now is the time to say, boy, wouldn't it have been great if we would have had a vaccine that we could use in these kinds of settings, both in terms of outbreak response, but even vaccinating in advance of a potential Marburg outbreak. So stay tuned. We're going to hear more about this. Do I believe that the world understands how critical it is right now to get this under control? They're reminded constantly by what Ebola did in 2014-16. But at this point, we still don't know which way this is going to tip.